So, what is the afterlife like? Part 2. In the previous video, we talked about what kind of bodies we'll have, who's going to be there, what kind of communication tools are available to us, and how knowledge is everywhere. Now in this video, I'm going to talk about some principles that apply to the afterlife. These are things that if you listen to a whole lot of near-death testimonies, you begin to realize that there are certain principles that are always in effect. And these are, I would put in the category of spiritual principles or laws that are governing the afterlife. And so I think you'll find this also very interesting. And hopefully you can start hearing these when you listen to your own near-death videos. You'll be starting to hear, oh, that's what that was. Back to how I ended the last one, the primacy of experience. There is something about the human experience that is really valuable to the next life. You could even think of it as each of us souls down here on the earth are really pieces of God that are having a human experience, but in that we're being tested, we're being tried, we're being given, in some cases, really awful experiences, and people make it through that. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it is crushing to their belief, and they end up just giving up and resigning from all of life. What you end up having is this huge spectrum of experience. The human story is one of every individual person. You could make a movie on their life, and indeed that is actually what's happening. And then we carry all of what we experienced, shame and envy and joy and play and childlikeness and power and talent and creativity. And just the human experience is, you could go on infinitely. But that is really valuable to us in the next life. And you cannot have those in the next life. Yes, there's a lot of experiences in heaven, but the bad stuff, if you will, the tests, the trials, the tribulations, the things that we have to overcome, don't happen there. People are happy there. People are in a blissful state there. And because of, if you listen to this whole video, you'll realize because of certain things that happen up there, you can't have the tests down here. Down here, you can actually be subjected to somebody who perpetrates violence against you and not be able to escape and have to deal with growing up in a broken home or a family where abuse happens and not being able to get out of it. It's like those things happen to us here. That can't happen up there, and you'll hear why in a moment. But because it does happen down here, these are very valuable experiences, and it somehow adds, even completes the whole up there, the people up there, the whole community, the whole of God is completed by us having these experiences down here. So much so that sometimes people in their near-death experiences are being thanked by their guides, their spirit guides, or the beings that they meet up there, who are saying, what you've done is such a gift to us. It is so valuable. You have in your being brave, brought back to us understanding of things that has really been good for all of us here to have. So it's worded, they word it in different ways, but the idea is that they thank us for our heroic willingness to be tested in the ways that we are tested down here. I thought that was really interesting. So what you ultimately end up, back to the internet analogy I was using in the last one, is each of us and our lives become a web page on the internet that exists in heaven. This huge internet on steroids where everyone is connected through God. They're connected to each other, and we are sharing our experiences, and we bring and post our own webpage there, if you will, and other people can read and understand more about their lives based on our lives. And so there's this incredible sharing. For instance, if you walk up to a person in the next life, you can ask them, I never had a life like you've had. Can I enter you and relive what that experience was, and people will say, sure, come on in. And so you can literally meld yourself with another person and relive their entire experiences on the earth as if you were them, and then separate yourself again, and now you have their experience added to your own. And people have actually done this with Jesus, where they've actually walked up to him and said, can I experience what it was like for you on the cross? And people joined in to his experience on the cross, and they relived it as if they were him, and then they got back out of him, and they were benefited by that. And other people talk about, I'll go on in future videos about some other people that have done this, even with the being of light and what that was like. But my point is, our lives are to be shared, and what we do down here, I think one of the reasons why it's so important is because we're actually contributing to the benefit of the whole by living our lives out here, doing the best we can, and experiencing all the vast array of experiences that are available down here. So what I'm covering is the primacy of experience. And to further illustrate this, you've seen how we love reality TV. Think of all the reality TV shows, that have Survivor and People Lost, that have really done well in the last decade. And that is intriguing to us because it's real life stories, it's human drama, it's somebody actually being tested. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how they're going to handle it. Well, guess what? Our lives are a lot like reality TV. And in fact, all of planet Earth is one big reality TV show. I don't want to trivialize what we go through down here, but I just want to show you what this looks like. I just was watching a near-death video today where a person, his name was David Bennett, he died in a getting crunched by a 25-foot wave out at sea, and he basically drowned, and his life vest got waterlogged, and he basically went under. Well, he pops out of his body, and he's greeted, looking at the light, he's greeted by three light beings that come out of the light, and he instantly feels at home with them. He feels like they're his friends, that they're his soulmates. He just feels incredible love from them and for them, and feels very close to them. And then another 9 or 12 beings come around them, and he can feel surrounded by this loving community. And then pretty quickly they started moving with him into this big sphere. And this big sphere actually shows up in a lot of near-death testimonies. And it looks like basically, an IMAX pavilion where it's a 360 circle, and you come into the center of it. It's large, and these light beings were on both sides of him. He said they were very beautiful, and they were very loving, and he felt very much at home with them and very familiar with who they were. And they were eager to go through his life review with him. They were looking forward to this. This was something they were actually very excited for. And so on little screens all throughout this circular sphere replays every scene of his life, every human being he ever interacted with, everybody who ever he had any contact with at all, from their perspective and his perspective. It is played back. And then he gets to experience what that was like again, and also the beings on each side of him also go through that. But there is no shame. There is no punishment. There is nobody criticizing them. Indeed, it's just they're giving him unconditional love and support, and witnessing and becoming aware of all that his life was. So it's more about just seeing and observing all that your life was. And that was very valuable to them, and to him as well. And these are wonderfully corrective and learning experiences for the people that have had them. Okay, I want to now move on to the next topic, and that is the priority of unconditional love. People, you can enter into all sorts of loving relationships down here. Most of the people in our lives are there because it's mutually beneficial. We're both loving each other, and it works. And those are wonderful relationships to have, and those are really, necessary. In the next life, whenever you do love somebody unconditionally, where there is no expectation for repayment, where you truly are just being good to somebody, like Jesus talked about, where you're being kind to the poor, you're feeding the homeless, you're being good to strangers and orphans and widows, and there is nothing that comes back to you. You can't, they're not going to invite you back to their house because they don't have a house to be able to feed you in return. That is wonderfully rewarding in the next life. Jesus said, if you are only good to those people who can repay you, what reward have you? Isn't that the same thing that the tax gatherers do? Instead, he wanted us to be good to people, even our enemies, people that would persecute us, and pray for them. And in so doing, we're going to become like his Father. Because the ball of light, the big being of light, is unconditionally loving, perfectly accepting, perfectly unconditionally loving. And every time we share in that experience of loving somebody who does not benefit us in any way, we just are sharing love with them. That is a wonderfully valuable experience in the next life. People are given lots of joy and reward of ecstasy when that has happened. It's like the whole stadium breaks open in cheering when they see that unconditional love. So be kind to strangers. Say hi to people that you don't know. Reach a hand out to somebody that is new in your life and befriend them. And that'll really make your life review have some wonderful high points in it. Okay. Back to something you've heard me share before, the primacy of desire. Let me just say words that are associated with desire are words like hope, inspiration, things that you need, that you thirst for, hungers, things that you wish for, that you long for, things that the requests that you make, things that you're very passionate about, things that bring you to life, things that make you, that bring you pleasure, your highest love, things that are the greatest delight for you. These are where your treasure is. And where your treasure is, like Jesus said, there is your heart also. And that's true. And that is, this primacy of desire is the address which you will live at in the next life. And it can grow and change as your interests grow and change over time in the next life. But that really does determine where you end up. And that's also going to affect how the rest of this talk goes. So keep listening. These are the things that determine who you befriend, who you associate with, who becomes important to you. And it can work in the wrong direction, folks. This is why I'm putting it down there. Howard Storm tells a story about his distressing near-death experience where he ends up being drugged into this kind of like hellish state where these spirits were fighting with him and hitting and biting him, and it was kind of not directly, but it just felt like they were, jabbing him. And what was interesting is he confesses that was because he was playing their game. He said, I knew who these people were. I was just like them. I could do what they would do better than they did it. And I was trying to have power over them. And I was going to prove to them that they were no match for me. And I was going to be more aggressive than they were. Hopefully you can hear that was his desire. And that desire is what kept those people in front of him and kept that experience going. It wasn't until he realized, okay, I'm not winning. There is no win here. The only way to win is not to play. And he got disinterested in the whole thing, that he didn't have to relate to those negative, more hellish spirits. He then was able to separate from them. And at that point, Jesus came down after he started singing and praying and brought him out of that. But my point is, your desires will determine where you end up. Be careful, because you may desire things that are not very good for you and not be aware of it. Particularly bad people or people that aren't good for you. How many of you have heard the story about, a woman who's stuck in a domestic violence situation, and you work hard to separate her from her husband who has physically been abusive to her, but she doesn't leave. She comes back. That after she goes to the hospital, he is the one that comes and picks her up, and she looks forward to going home with him. Well, that's very much true in the afterlife. If you are bonded to people that are of a negative influence and you can't separate yourself from them, then guess what? That's the life that you get to live out. So be careful who you are attracted to. If you're trying to use violence to get your way, then you're going to be with other violent people who are also trying to get their way, and the two of you are going to be interacting, or the whole plane of existence. You may be with other people that are using violence and anger and malice in order to put other people down, in order to be critical, thinking they're going to win something. And whatever that bond is, that keeps that going. And that's why they end up having that experience. And there are people that are taken into the next life that are given vision of these things and that see these things. And I do believe they're real because it follows this primacy of desire. Where your heart is, there is your treasure. Where your treasure is, there is your heart also. Okay. Now let's talk about perfect freedom. All these things go together, so they all have to be taught at once. Perfect freedom. We ourselves are not free down here. Down here, you get stuck in bad families, you get stuck in bad countries, you get stuck in bad communities, and you have to deal with it. Up there, you do not have to get stuck anywhere. You're given the perfect freedom to basically create the life that you want up there. Sometimes when people end up in a bad place up there, it's because they think that they don't have any control, like they didn't have any control down here. But let me tell you, and remember this, and teach it if you can. You have perfect freedom up there. Down here, you have a lot more freedom than you may be giving yourself credit for. But up there, you have perfect freedom, which means you do not have to relate to anybody, talk to anybody, be in the presence of anybody that you do not want to be. And this freedom of your desire and your choices is always enforced. Whether you believe you have that freedom or not, personal freedom is always in effect. No one can trap you somewhere where you don't want to be. Let me give you a quote about the freedom of movement. The same freedom thing applies to movement. There was Sundar Singh in the 1920s wrote this in one of his books. In heaven, distance is never felt by anyone. For as soon as one forms the wish to go to a certain place, he at once finds himself there. Distances are only felt here in the material world. If one wishes to see a saint in another sphere, either he himself is transported to that sphere in a moment of thought, or at once the distant saint comes and arrives in his presence. My point is, you can instantly be wherever you wish to be in the next life. And that freedom of movement is enjoyed by the near-death experiencers. And then when they're back in this body, that's one of the things they miss the most, is they can't go anywhere except bringing their body with them. But what this means is that you can't get trapped. And your desires get to will determine where you're going to end up, and you can end up almost anywhere pretty much by a thought. Okay, now we go back to how God treats us and how the spirit beings that are there that are good, that want to heal us and grow us and show us good things, they operate by this principle. Everything is by invitation. Everything that you can learn, all correction, all training, all growth is by invitation. That means that they present you things that you can dive into, or you can find abhorrent and leave because of them. They bring you things into your awareness. They bring options. They bring people. They bring themselves. They show you who they are. And you then have a choice to pick if they are going to be your friends, or if that's somebody you want to be with, or if that's somebody you're going to avoid. And people don't always choose what's good. There are many stories where people run away into the darkness, where they dive headlong into hell, as some people have described it, because they don't want to be around the being of light. And that's sad, but just know that when the light shows himself to you, it's like the first person you get to meet oftentimes is the being of light, the big being of light. There are little beings of light, they call them light beings, but the big being of light is an invitation, and it's subtle how it's asked, but as he shows you and reveals you and discusses things with you, and you can talk to him for a long time, he's actually asking questions and showing you things, and how you're responding is determining what happens next. If you're responding with interest and joy, and your heart is moving towards that, and you're finding that inspiring and delightful, then more is given to you. But if you find that not too much and overwhelming and too uncomfortable, then you can go elsewhere. And he lets you go. He doesn't chase you down. He is Because everything is by invitation, you have the right to rip up the invitation and say, I don't want this, and end up in a completely different place. And people do that. That is so true. They don't always say yes. In fact, the variety of responses to the being of light is as infinite as there are people. Everybody reacts differently. There's entirely different conversations. Some people want to dive right into him. Other people kind of find him boring and want to go entertain themselves with something that's meaningless or physical. They want to talk about atoms or stardust or, the evolution of the universe. And it gets kind of depressing because they miss the whole concept of love altogether. Okay. A corollary to this being of light, this truth about everything is by invitation, is nothing is by force. And so that's why when you see a verse like in Romans 12 where it says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord, and where Paul the apostle encourages us to leave room for the vengeance of God and to not try and take matters into our own hands. The point is, only God can perfectly apply with wisdom, the invitation for a person to change their behavior, for a person to be corrected. If we, in our humanness, get angry and try and force somebody to get it and punish somebody with anger to try and pound with some coercive tactic the truth into them, we mess it up because then they get resistant to our forcefulness. They get reactive to our aggression. The whole concept of being invited into a corrective experience goes away, and so they end up further from the truth than they would have if you had just left it up to God to be the one who perfectly applied the invitation and bringing awareness to person's choices so that they could choose something better. And so just know that when the Bible uses the phrase vengeance is mine, what it's really saying is only he knows how to perfectly invite people into a new experience and into a new way of doing things. It's not up for us to use our methods of power and control and punishment, because that doesn't work. That actually pushes people further away. Up there, everything is by invitation. There is no coercion. Okay. Let me move now to perfect boundaries is the next concept. These are all related. Perfect boundaries. Back in the day when I was growing up in recovery, I was connected to Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend, who wrote a lot of books on boundaries. Boundaries with kids, boundaries with spouses, boundaries in dating, just the general book boundaries. Really good stuff. And I didn't realize till I was watching all these near-death videos how they were exactly right. In the next life, boundaries are respected, boundaries are upheld, boundaries are perfectly not violated. In that way, people basically live what they want to live, and other people can show them, invite them, ask them, make requests. But if you don't want to give something, you don't have to give it. If you don't want to go with somebody, you don't have to go with them. And so nobody can take something from you. But what's interesting is boundaries also apply to God. It's true for him as well. And so